I never thought much about motion sensor lights until I noticed one appeared outside my apartment door. Not inside the hallway where it would make sense for building management to install it, but specifically angled toward my door, mounted on the wall with careful precision. The thing is, my apartment faces east, and the guy who installed it, Marcus from Unit 212, his apartment faces west, completely opposite direction. There's no reason he should care about what happens outside my door, but he did care, and it took me 3 weeks to figure out why. I moved into the Riverside Apartments last September, one of those converted warehouse buildings in the Arts District that still smells faintly of whatever industrial coating they used on the concrete floors. My place is small, a studio really, but it has these massive windows and enough space for my drafting table. I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly, which means I keep weird hours and sometimes don't leave my apartment for days at a time. The building is quiet, filled with other people who seem equally content to exist in their own bubbles. I'd seen Marcus a handful of times in passing, always carrying something, groceries or laundry or his work bag. He's one of those people who's hard not to notice. Tall, with dark curly hair that's always slightly dishevelled, and these warm brown eyes that crinkle when he smiles. He wore the same navy blue jacket almost every day, and I'd caught myself watching for it more than I wanted to admit. The first time I really spoke to him was in the mailroom. I was struggling with a package, one of those absurdly oversized boxes that's 90% air and 10% the single poster tube I'd actually ordered. Marcus walked in just as I was trying to wedge it through the doorway at an angle that defied physics. "Need a hand?" His voice was lower than I expected, with this slight rasp that made it sound like he'd just woken up. "I've got it," I said, which was obviously a lie since the box was now stuck and I was essentially trapped behind it. He laughed, not unkindly, and helped me maneuver it free. His hands were careful, deliberate, the way he gripped the corners and coordinated with my movements, without either of us having to say much. When we finally got it into the hallway, I was slightly out of breath and definitely embarrassed. "Thanks. I'm Elliot, by the way, 214. Marcus, 212. He smiled, and I noticed a small scar above his left eyebrow. "We're neighbours." "Opposite sides," I said, because apparently I needed to state the obvious. "Yeah." He glanced at my box. "What did you order? A small car?" I laughed despite myself. "Poster tube. Don't ask me why they needed this much packaging." We stood there for a moment in that awkward way you do when you're not quite sure if the conversation is over. Then someone else came into the mailroom and Marcus gave me a small wave before heading back upstairs. I thought about that interaction more than I should have over the next few days. The way he'd helped without making me feel incompetent. The warmth in his eyes. The fact that I now knew exactly which apartment was his. I started noticing him more after that. Not intentionally or maybe completely intentionally, I'm still not sure. I'd hear his door open in the morning around 7:30, the particular metallic click of his lock that was somehow distinct from everyone else's. I'd catch glimpses of him in the parking lot, always walking with purpose, his messenger bag slung across his chest. Once, I saw him at the coffee shop 2 blocks away, sitting alone with a book, his brow furrowed in concentration. I didn't go in. I told myself it was because the line was too long, but really I just wasn't ready for another conversation where I'd inevitably say something awkward. The motion light appeared on a Tuesday. I came home late from a client meeting, exhausted and ready to collapse, and when I stepped off the elevator there was this bright LED glow illuminating my doorway. At first, I thought maybe building management had finally decided to do something about the dim hallway lighting. But when I looked closer, I could see it was a standalone unit, battery-powered, mounted with what looked like heavy-duty adhesive strips, and it was positioned specifically to cover my door and the immediate area in front of it. I glanced around the hallway. No other doors had them, just mine. The next morning, I checked again to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Nope. Still there, its sensor eye watching the empty hallway like a tiny guardian. I considered asking the building manager about it, but something stopped me. It felt like a mystery I wanted to solve on my own. Over the next week I became hyper-aware of that light. Every time I came home, it would blink on, flooding the space with cool white illumination. It was actually kind of nice, practical even. The hallway had always been too dark, and I'd fumbled with my keys more times than I could count. But the question gnawed at me. Who had installed it, and why? I started paying closer attention to my surroundings, looking for clues. I noticed scuff marks on the wall near where the light was mounted, fresh ones that hadn't been there before. I saw a small piece of cardboard in the recycling bin by the elevator, with the same brand name as the motion sensor. And then, one evening, I saw Marcus in the hallway near my door, standing there with his hands in his pockets, just looking at the light. "Hey," I said, stepping off the elevator. The sensor caught my movement and the light blazed to life. He startled slightly, turning to face me. "Oh, hey, Elliot." "Admiring the new addition?" I gestured at the light. Something flickered across his face, a mix of emotions I couldn't quite read. "Yeah, it's good, brighter. Any idea who installed it?" He shrugged, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Building management, maybe?" "Maybe." I unlocked my door, aware of him still standing there. Seems weird they'd only do one door, though. "Yeah, weird." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, have a good night." He walked away before I could respond, heading not toward his own apartment but toward the stairs at the far end of the hall. I stood in my doorway, watching him go, and something clicked in my mind. The way he'd been standing there, studying the light. The way he'd avoided my question. The scuff marks on the wall that were at exactly the height someone tall would make while installing something. Marcus had put up that light. I was suddenly certain of it. But why? His apartment was on the complete opposite side of the building. He had no practical reason to care about the lighting outside my door, unless it wasn't about practicality at all. I started testing a theory. Over the next few days I made note of when I saw Marcus in the hallway. It wasn't random. He had a pattern, sure, his morning routine and evening return from work, but there were other times too. Times when he'd appear near the elevator or the mailroom right around when I was coming or going. Times when he'd be carrying trash to the chute that was much closer to my door than his. Times when our paths would cross just a little too frequently to be coincidence. And he always noticed the light. I'd catch him glancing at it, this brief flicker of his eyes upward, checking to make sure it was still there, still working. Once, I came home to find him actually adjusting it, fine-tuning the angle. He saw me step off the elevator and froze, his hand still on the sensor casing. "It was crooked," he said, his voice slightly defensive. "Was it?" "Yeah." He stepped back, examining his work. "Should be better now." I walked to my door and the light activated perfectly, illuminating the entire area. "Definitely better. You've got a good eye for this stuff." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I noticed you were fumbling with your keys a lot, in the dark. Seemed like it might help." There it was, an admission sort of. I turned to look at him fully, and in the bright LED light, I could see a faint flush creeping up his neck. "You noticed me fumbling with my keys." I kept my voice gentle, curious rather than accusatory. "I notice a lot of things." He met my eyes then, and something in his expression made my heart rate pick up. "Is that weird?" "That probably sounds weird." "It's not weird," I said quietly. "It's actually really thoughtful." We stood there in the hallway, the motion light casting sharp shadows around us, and I felt the air between us charge with something unspoken. I wanted to ask him directly why he cared, why someone whose apartment faced the complete opposite direction would install a light for me, but I was afraid of the answer. Or maybe I was afraid I already knew the answer, and saying it out loud would make it real, and potentially ruin whatever this fragile thing was. "I should go," Marcus said, but he didn't move. "Yeah," I agreed, also not moving. Finally he smiled, that warm crinkle-eye smile, and headed back down the hallway. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner, then let myself into my apartment, my mind racing. That night I couldn't focus on work. I kept thinking about Marcus, about the careful way he'd installed that light, the way he'd noticed something as small as me struggling with my keys in a dim hallway. I thought about all the times I'd seen him, all the small moments that suddenly seemed less random and more intentional, and I thought about how I felt when I saw him, this warm flutter in my chest that I'd been carefully ignoring for weeks. I'd been alone for a long time. My last relationship had ended badly, the kind of bad that makes you question whether you're capable of being loved. I'd thrown myself into work, into the safety of my studio apartment and my solitary routine. The idea of being vulnerable again, of putting myself out there, terrified me. But Marcus, with his thoughtful gestures and warm eyes, was making me want to try. The next day, I did something impulsive. I bought a motion sensor light, the same brand as the one outside my door, and installed it outside Marcus's apartment. It took me 3 tries to get the angle right, and I was paranoid the entire time that someone would see me and ask what I was doing. But I managed it, and when I was done I stood back and admired my work. It looked good. Professional even. Then I waited. I heard his door open around 7:30, the usual time, and I pressed my ear to my own door like a complete creep, listening. There was silence, then footsteps, then the sound of his door closing again. A few seconds later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Marcus standing there, and he was grinning. Actually grinning, this huge, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "You installed a light outside my door," he said. "Your apartment faces the other way," I replied. "Seemed only fair." He laughed, shaking his head. "Elliot, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I've been wanting to talk to you for months. Since before you even moved in, actually. I saw you during your building tour and I thought you were beautiful. And then you actually moved in and I completely froze up. I couldn't figure out how to just approach you like a normal person, so I started doing these ridiculous things instead. The light was because I genuinely was worried about you in that dark hallway, but it was also because I wanted an excuse to be near your door, to maybe run into you more often. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You think I'm beautiful?" "Incredibly." He took a step closer. "And I know this is probably the worst way to go about this, being creepy and installing lights and basically stalking my neighbour, but I really would like to take you to dinner, if you're interested. If you're even into guys," which I probably should have established first before declaring my feelings in a hallway. I started laughing, partially from relief, partially from the absurdity of the situation. "I'm very into guys, specifically I'm very into you. I've been watching for your navy jacket every morning like some kind of lovesick teenager." "Really?" "Really. And yes, I would love to get dinner with you." His smile somehow got even bigger. "Tonight?" "Tonight works." We went to a small Italian place in the neighbourhood, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. I learned that Marcus was a middle school teacher, that he loved terrible science fiction movies, that he'd moved to the city 5 years ago and still sometimes felt like an outsider. He learned that I was terrified of commitment, that I'd been hurt before, that I spent way too much time in my apartment because the outside world felt overwhelming sometimes. "I get that," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But maybe we could be overwhelmed together sometimes." I squeezed his fingers. "I'd like that." We started slowly. Coffee dates in the morning before he went to work. Movie nights in one of our apartments, usually his because he had an actual couch instead of floor cushions. Long conversations in the hallway under our matching motion lights, talking until we were both exhausted but neither wanting to say goodnight. He was patient with me, never pushing, always giving me space to process my feelings, and gradually I felt myself opening up, letting him in past all the walls I'd built. 3 months later, we were sitting on his couch, my head resting on his shoulder, watching some terrible space movie he'd insisted was a classic. The motion lights had become a running joke between us. Our origin story, the ridiculous way we'd circled each other before finally connecting. "I'm glad you installed that light," I said quietly. Marcus kissed the top of my head. "I'm glad you noticed." "How could I not? My apartment faces the other way." He laughed, and I felt the rumble of it through his chest. Best decision I ever made, being creepy and installing lights for my cute neighbour. "Second best," I corrected, tilting my head up to look at him. "Oh? What's the first?" "Actually talking to me instead of just watching from afar." Fair point. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I thought about how far I'd come from that scared, isolated person fumbling with keys in a dark hallway. How Marcus had literally and figuratively brought light into my life. How he'd seen me struggling and decided to help, even when he had no reason to except that he cared. Love isn't always dramatic declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes it's noticing someone needs a light and installing one, even when your apartment faces the other way. Sometimes it's showing up, being patient, and creating space for someone to feel safe enough to let you in. Marcus taught me that, and every time I come home now when that motion sensor blinks on and floods my doorway with light, I'm reminded that I'm not alone anymore, that someone is paying attention, that I'm cared for. The lights are still there, both of them, matching sentinels on opposite sides of the building. We'll probably never take them down. They're part of our story now, the physical proof that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, from people who notice the small struggles and decide to do something about them. from someone whose apartment faces the other way, but who cares enough to install a light anyway. Total char count, 16,847.